Good morning to you, Mitch.
Good morning.
I have to tell you, I was very touched by this book because it brought back a lot of feelings. I think anybody who reads it would start thinking about, I wonder what it would be like to get a call from whoever your loved one is.
Yeah.
Isn't that sort of what you were thinking in the twists and turns that this story
Yeah,
takes?
it's a small town in Michigan that suddenly the phones start ringing and it's people calling from heaven, but it only happens in this one little town and it only happens to a handful of people.
On a Friday.
On a Friday. And it's what happens when the rest of the world starts to find out and starts flocking to this town, everybody looking for the miracle, some people trying to disprove it. And at the center is a guy who's kind of heartbroken and he lost his wife and he's got a little 7-year-old boy who starts walking around with a toy phone saying, well, when's mommy going to call us if everybody's calling from heaven? So he decides to prove it's a hoax. And it's about what sort of goes on as these two things meet. As it gets bigger and bigger, the story gets bigger and bigger, and he thinks he's figured it out. And it culminates with this live broadcast. Here we are on television, a live broadcast of a phone call from heaven where it's going to prove once and for all that there is an afterlife, just as he thinks he's sort of cracked the hoax. And so I'm not going to say any more because I'll ruin the end of the book.
No, but there's a part about losing a loved one is never like starting over. It's more like continuing without.
Yeah.
And that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck.
Well, he loses, for me, I started writing this after my mother had a stroke, several strokes, and she lost the ability to speak. And I never realized, when you're a kid, you always wish your mom would stop talking.
Stop talking, yes.
But I haven't heard her speak in nearly 4 years, and it's so different. She's alive, but it's not the same. And the preciousness of the human voice. I know so many people who have lost loved ones and they won't erase the phone messages on their cell phone because they just want to hear that. And so I started to think, well, what if you could actually hear those voices again?
I know people. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, you talk too in this book about the history of the telephone, which I love because it was really created out of love.
Yeah, most people don't know that, and I didn't either until I started researching. Alexander Graham Bell's wife was deaf, and he was actually trying to come up with a way to teach her to speak, and he stumbled upon this way of voices traveling through the phone. And the actual first phone call ever made was between him and his assistant in 2 different rooms, and the sentence was, "Come here, I want to see you."
Yeah.
Which gives you goosebumps because really that's what the phone is. Well, wouldn't that be kind of what people would say on calls from heaven?
You talk about the phone, too, being the place where you often get good news and bad news.
Well, all of life is traveled through the telephone, isn't it now? I mean, in some way, shape, or form. But it's fascinating that the phone, everybody uses it now to text or to send pictures, but nobody uses their voice to speak anymore.
I know people say they'd rather lose their sight than lose their voice.
Yeah. Well, it was very interesting. Morrie Schwartz, the last thing he said to me before he died from Tuesdays with Morrie, he said, "Come to my grave and visit me and talk to me like we're talking now." And I said, "How can it be like we're talking now? You won't be able to talk back." And he said, "Well, Mitch, I'll make you a deal. After I'm dead, you talk, I'll listen."
I'll listen.
And, I've always been fascinated by that. People want to have those conversations again. And so that became the motivation for this book to sort of say, well, what if you actually could? What if a miracle actually took place?
Yeah, and it's a miracle. Before we go, can we just ask a question about Detroit?
Yeah.
Because you talk about hope and false hope. Detroit has been compared to Chernobyl, Mogadishu, but you still have hope about Detroit.
Only by outsiders.
Only by, listen, I'm asking on behalf of Ryan Cadro, who's a senior broadcast producer who loves all things Detroit, as do you. Why do you still have such hope in Detroit?
Well, because I'm a human being, and human beings need hope. And I set this book in Michigan for the first time deliberately because of that, in a little town that's really hard hit economically, and this kind of becomes their boon, only you find out that they were actually almost better off before everybody started chasing after it. I have great hope for Detroit. I have great hope in humanity, and we're not going anywhere. We're
okay,
fine.
on that note, we'll say go Detroit Lions, just saying. Thank you, Mitch. Thank you very much. And the first phone call from heaven goes on sale today.